I'm Michael Hartman, I'm 32 years old, and my own father locked me out of the house my grandmother left me. A house that was legally mine. Before I tell you how I froze their $1.4 million deal and took back everything they tried to steal, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories can reach. It all started on a Tuesday, a cold, gray Portland afternoon. I was driving home from a business trip in Seattle, feeling on top of the world. I just landed a major new client for my communications firm. A huge win that had been months in the making. I remember tapping the steering wheel to the rhythm of the music on the radio, thinking about calling my best friend, Leah, to plan a celebration. Life felt good. Life felt stable. I turned onto Mayfield Drive, my street. The big oak trees were shedding their last autumn leaves, carpeting the sidewalk in gold and brown. And there it was, number 17. My grandmother Helen's house. My house. It wasn't just brick and mortar. It was a century of family history, a place where I'd spent every summer, every Christmas of my childhood. Grandma Helen had left it to me, and only me, in her will. It was the last piece of her I had left. I pulled into the driveway, grabbed my briefcase, and walked up the familiar stone path. I stuck my key in the lock. It didn't turn. That's strange, I thought. Maybe it's sticking. I tried again, jiggling it a little. Nothing. My brow furrowed. I tried the back door, the one off the kitchen. Same result. A new, shiny brass lock stared back at me. A lock I had never seen before. A cold feeling, colder than the autumn air, started to creep up my spine. I knocked, the sound echoing unnaturally. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" Only the rustle of leaves answered. I pulled out my phone to call my dad. My mind was racing through logical explanations. Maybe there was a break-in in the neighborhood. Maybe a handyman had to change the locks for an emergency repair and forgot to tell me. As my finger hovered over his contact name, my phone buzzed. A text message. From him. My heart pounded as I opened it. The message was short, brutal, and to the point. "Don't bother calling. The locks have been changed. You don't live there anymore." I read it once, then twice. The words swam before my eyes. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My own father. The air was punched out of my lungs. I sank down onto the cold steps, the steps I had sat on with my grandma 1,000 times, and just stared at the screen. You don't live there anymore. Now, fast forward 2 days. 2 days of hell, of numbly crashing on Leah's couch, of my calls going straight to his voicemail, and my mother's and my brother's. I was a ghost to my own family. I was sitting there, nursing a cup of coffee I didn't want, when my phone buzzed again. It was an email from my new lawyer, Amber Doyle. A woman known for being a shark. The subject line was in all caps. "They've acted. $1.40 million deal is frozen. Call me now." I stared at the email. A slow, cold smile spread across my face for the first time in 48 hours. They thought they had locked me out. They thought they had won. They had no idea I wasn't just a son they could push around. I was a communications director who specialized in crisis management. And I had just created the biggest crisis of their lives. They had started a war, and I was about to finish it. To understand how a family gets to this point, you have to understand my grandmother, Helen Hartman. She wasn't your typical grandma. She didn't just bake cookies and knit sweaters. She built furniture. She painted sprawling, abstract canvases. She could debate politics with the best of them, and she had a laugh that could fill the entire house. That house on Mayfield Drive was her masterpiece, and she treated it like a living entity. "A house isn't just a place to live, Mikey," she'd tell me. "It's a place that lives with you. It breathes with the memories you make in it." She and I were two peas in a pod. While my parents, Dennis and Carol, were always focused on the practical, on money, on appearances, Grandma Helen taught me about the things that last. Legacy, history, trust. My younger brother, Ryan, was always closer to my parents. He was the golden child, the one who followed their lead, who shared their materialistic worldview. I was Helen's boy. I remember one Saturday afternoon, I was about 16, and I found her in the county records office of all places. She had unrolled a massive, crackling blueprint across a table. It was the original 1920s plan for the house. "Look at this," she'd whispered, her eyes shining with excitement. "See this wall? It wasn't original. And there was a dumbwaiter here in the kitchen. Can you imagine?" We spent the entire day tracing the history of our home, not as a piece of real estate, but as a story. She saw the soul in things. My father, when I told him about it later, just grunted and said, "Hope you checked the property value while you were there." He just didn't get it. He never did. That disconnect became even clearer in her later years. I remember her showing me her new tablet, a gadget my dad had openly scoffed at. "An old woman like you doesn't need that," he'd said during a family dinner. But Helen was fascinated by technology. She saw it as a new way to tell stories, to preserve memories. "Look, Mikey," she said one day, her eyes sparkling as she showed me the screen. "I've created a digital time capsule. It's on something called the cloud. Can you imagine? A box of our memories floating in the sky." She showed me folders of old photos she'd painstakingly scanned, letters she'd written, even some old 8mm family movies she'd had digitized. "Everything that really matters is in here," she told me, her voice turning serious for a moment. "Safe and sound. It even has 2 passwords like a bank vault, so no one can get in who isn't supposed to." At the time, I just smiled and nodded. A digital time capsule. It sounded like something out of a sci-fi movie. I had no idea that this time capsule would one day become the single most important thing in my life. I didn't know it held the key to my entire future. When Grandma Helen passed away, it felt like the world lost its color. The funeral was a blur of black suits and quiet, murmured condolences. My parents put on a great show of grief. My father gave a eulogy about her frugal, simple life, which was his backhanded way of saying she didn't spend enough money. My mother, Carol, dabbed her eyes with a pristine tissue, looking every bit the grieving daughter-in-law. I just felt numb, a hollowed-out version of myself. The real drama started a week later, at the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. The room was small and stuffy, smelling of old paper and furniture polish. It was me, my parents, and Ryan, all sitting in stiff, uncomfortable chairs. The lawyer, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Abernathy, who had been my grandmother's confidant for 40 years, cleared his throat. He read through a few minor bequests, some jewelry to a cousin, a donation to the local library. My parents nodded along, their faces composed. Then he got to the main asset, the house. "And regarding the property at 17 Mayfield Drive," he said, looking over his spectacles directly at me, "Helen's instructions are unequivocal. She leaves the house and all its contents solely to her grandson, Michael Hartman." Silence. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, compressed silence of a bomb before it detonates. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I hadn't expected it. I truly hadn't. I looked at my parents. My father's face was slowly turning a deep, blotchy red. It was the color it got when he lost a deal or felt he'd been publicly disrespected. My mother, Carol, didn't move a muscle. She just went rigid, her back ramrod straight, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the handles of her expensive purse. It was a terrifying stillness, like a predator that had just seen its prey escape. Ryan's tell was more subtle. His breathing became shallow, and he started fiddling with the cuff of his shirt, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. He was already detaching himself. Mr. Abernathy, seemingly oblivious, continued reading a personal note Helen had left for me. Her words filled the room, a voice from beyond the grave. "For Michael," she had written, "who sees this house not for its value, but for its heart. I trust you to be its keeper. I trust you to protect its soul." "This is an outrage," my father finally exploded, his fist slamming down on the polished table, making us all jump. She was clearly not in her right mind. She was an old woman, frail, easily manipulated. My mother placed a restraining hand on his arm, but her eyes were like chips of ice. They were fixed on me. It wasn't grief in her eyes. It was cold, hard fury. It was the look of someone whose inheritance, whose payday had just been snatched away. The ride home was dead silent. The air in the car was so thick with resentment I could barely breathe. I tried once. Dad. I had no idea she was going to. Don't. He cut me off, his eyes fixed on the road. Just don't say anything, Michael. That night I called Leah. I had to talk to someone outside the blast radius. She listened patiently as I recounted the whole scene in her quiet apartment. Wow, Mike, that's intense, she said, handing me a beer. But it's what Helen wanted. You have to honor that. I know, but you should have seen them, Leah. It was like I had personally robbed them, I said, pacing her living room. And Dad said she was manipulated. He's laying the groundwork for a fight. I know it. So what are you going to do? Move in, I said, the decision solidifying as I spoke the words. I'm going to move in and take care of the place just like she asked. It's the right thing to do. Even as I said it, I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. I decided to make one last attempt at peace. The next day, I called my parents. My mother answered. What do you want, Michael? She asked, her voice clipped and cold. Mom, I just want to talk about this. I don't want to fight. The house, it means a lot to me, you know that. It's not about the money. Oh, it's very easy to say it's not about the money when you're the one getting $1 million asset for free, she snapped. Your father and I are very disappointed in your behavior, taking advantage of a sick old woman. We're discussing our legal options. I have nothing more to say to you. The line went dead. So that was it. No discussion. No compromise. Just threats. True to my word, I started moving my things into the big, empty house. It felt strange and quiet without my grandmother's presence. But I was determined to fill it with life again. One of the first things I did was try to access her digital time capsule. I thought maybe there were more photos or letters in there, something to make me feel closer to her. I found her old tablet on the nightstand and powered it on. The login screen for the cloud service popped up. I knew the first password. It was the name of her first dog, Buster. I typed it in. Access denied. A second password was required. I tried everything I could think of, her birthday, my grandfather's name, the street address. Nothing worked. It was locked tight. It was a small, frustrating mystery, but in the chaos of everything else, I eventually put it aside, leaving the tablet on the mantelpiece. The first real shot across the bow came about a week later. I was in the attic, sorting through old boxes filled with memories, when I found a stack of my grandmother's recent mail that had been overlooked. Tucked inside a bank statement was a folded piece of paper that must have been printed by mistake. It was an email. My heart started to hammer when I saw the names in the to and from fields. It was an email exchange between my father, Dennis Hartman, and a man named Bill Thatcher from a company called Cascade Urban Partners. The date on the email was 3 weeks before my grandmother had died. My father's words jumped off the page, cold and clinical. Bill, regarding 17 Mayfield, we are very close. She's fading fast. The moment she's gone, the property is yours. We are agreed on the $1.4 million price. Just need to handle the formality of the will, which should be straightforward. My son, Ryan, is fully on board. I had to sit down on the dusty floorboards. My head was spinning. The air grew thin. They weren't just planning to sell the house. They had a buyer. They had a price. They were circling like vultures, waiting for her to die, discussing it in cheerful corporate terms. My own father, my own mother, who was CC'd on the email and had replied with a simple, chilling "looks good." And Ryan, fully on board. The nausea rose in my throat. This wasn't just about losing an inheritance. This was a deep, sickening betrayal of the woman who had raised them. They weren't grieving her. They were cashing her in. The whole performance at the funeral, at the lawyer's office, it was all a lie. And that's when I knew. This wasn't going to be a simple disagreement. This was going to be a war. The battle lines had been drawn long before I ever knew I was a soldier. I was standing in the middle of a battlefield, holding a piece of paper that was both a death certificate for my family and the first bullet in my own gun. I folded the email, my hands shaking, put it in my wallet, and walked downstairs. The beautiful, quiet house no longer felt like a sanctuary, felt like a fortress. and I was its last defender. The first official attack didn't come with a shout, but with the quiet, rustling arrival of a certified letter. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely sign for it. Inside, the dense, legalistic language boiled down to one ugly truth. My parents, Dennis and Carol Hartman, had filed a petition with the court to contest the will. The grounds? Undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. In plain English, they were officially, publicly, claiming that I had manipulated my dying grandmother and that she had been too senile to know what she was doing. They were trying to paint me as a calculating villain and her as a crazy old woman. My blood ran cold, then hot with a pure, unadulterated rage. This was a desecration of her memory, a final, greedy spit on her grave. Before I could even process the legal ramifications, the second phase of their attack began. It was a classic PR campaign, and as a communications director, I recognized the insidious strategy instantly. They were trying to control the narrative, to isolate me and define me before I could define myself. The first call was from my Aunt Martha, my dad's sister. Her voice was dripping with a syrupy, fake concern that made my skin crawl. "Michael, dear, I just spoke with your father. He is so worried about you. He said you've been acting so erratically since the funeral, that you have this unhealthy obsession with the house." "Aunt Martha, he's lying," I said, my voice tight. "Now, Michael, denial is a part of grief," she cooed, a line I was sure my mother had fed her. "Your parents just want what's best for the family. Perhaps selling the house and splitting the money is the fairest thing. A clean break for everyone. Clean break. For them, that meant a check for $700,000 each. For me, it meant losing the last tangible piece of my grandmother." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling with fury. The next day, I got an email from a cousin with a link to a community forum post. A veiled, anonymous query about what to do when an elderly relative is taken advantage of. The details were just specific enough. They weren't just fighting me in court. They were poisoning the well with the rest of the family, painting me as unstable and greedy. It was brilliant. It was diabolical. The confrontation I'd been dreading happened a few days later. My father showed up at the house unannounced. He didn't knock. He used his old key, the one I hadn't yet had the heart or foresight to change, and just walked in. I was in the kitchen, carefully refinishing one of the old wooden cabinets, a project I'd once planned to do with Helen. "We need to talk," he said, his voice hard. He stood in the doorway, blocking the afternoon light, a silhouette of disapproval. "There's nothing to talk about, Dad. You're suing me." "I'm trying to fix a mistake," he shot back, stepping into the room. His eyes swept over the half-finished cabinet with disdain. "You're wasting your time with this old junk. This house is a teardown. Its value is in the land, Michael. Something you've never understood." He tried to soften his tone, a tactic he often used in business. "Look, son, I'm a pragmatist. This isn't personal. It's about securing the family's wealth. That house is $1 million-plus asset just sitting there, losing value. It's financially irresponsible to let it decay. Grandma loved this house, this cabinet. She and I were supposed to." He cut me off with an impatient wave of his hand. "Your grandmother was a sentimental old fool who didn't live in the real world. The real world is about assets, about security, about making smart decisions for your family's future. A future you are jeopardizing with this childish fantasy." Every word was a slap. He wasn't just insulting me. He was insulting her, the woman who gave him life, and framing it as practical advice. The rage I'd been suppressing boiled over into a cold, hard certainty. "Get out," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "What did you say to me?" He sputtered, the mask of the pragmatist falling away. "I said get out of my house." I stood up, my fists clenched at my sides, my knuckles white. "Before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and contempt. It was the first time in my life I had ever stood up to him so directly. He looked at me as if I were a stranger. Then he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. The cabinet rattled. The whole house seemed to groan in protest. The final, and perhaps most painful, betrayal came from my brother, Ryan. He called me that evening. His voice was hesitant, laced with a nervousness that immediately put me on edge. "Hey, Mike, you okay?" "Define okay, Ryan. Dad came by today. We had a fight." There was a pause. "Yeah, I know. He told me," Ryan said. "Listen, Mike, I know this is hard, but I've been thinking." He took a deep breath. "You know I'm trying to get my own business off the ground. This graphic design thing takes capital. A lot of it. And I'm drowning in student loan debt. Man, I'm not gonna get a bank loan." My stomach twisted. I knew where this was going, and I felt a desperate urge to stop him, to not hear the words I knew were coming. "Dad and Mom, they said that if the house is sold, they'll use a part of their share to invest in my company. A big part, Mike. Enough to clear my debt and buy the equipment I need. It would be my big break. The chance I've been waiting for my whole life." The words hung in the air between us, ugly and desperate. He wasn't asking for my blessing. He was asking for my sacrifice. "So you want me to just give up?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Give up Grandma's house, her memory, so you can get a business loan from the people who are trying to steal it?" I tried to reason with him. "Ryan, it's a lie. It's their money they're thinking about. They're just using you as an excuse. It's not stealing, it's reallocating assets," he mumbled, using our father's favorite heartless phrase. He sounded like a puppet. "Come on, Mike. Be reasonable. It's a life-changing amount of money. For me. For my future. Can't you do this for me? For your brother." That was it. That was the moment my heart truly broke. It wasn't just about the money for my parents. It was about control. And they were using my own brother, his dreams, his financial desperation, as a weapon against me. "No, Ryan," I said, my voice cold and final. "I can't. And the fact that you're asking me means you're not the brother I thought you were." I hung up the phone. I was truly alone now. My entire family was aligned against me, each for their own selfish reasons. The next week was the business trip to Seattle. The deal I was closing was the culmination of a year's hard work, a huge step in my career. It was a promotion in all but name, and my boss had made it clear that my salary and future at the firm depended on it. For 2 days, I threw myself into the work, using the anger and betrayal as fuel. I was focused, professional, and relentless. I nailed the presentation. We won the contract. It was a massive success. Driving back to Portland, I allowed myself a sliver of hope. Maybe things would be okay. I was successful in my own right. I didn't need their money. I could afford to keep the house, to fight for it. That hope evaporated the second I put my key in the lock. After discovering I was locked out, after reading my father's cruel text, I just stood there in shock. Then, a switch flipped in my brain. The grief and the shock were replaced by a cold, clear focus. The part of my brain that handled crisis management at my job took over. I wasn't a son anymore. I was a professional dealing with a hostile takeover. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. I didn't call anyone to scream or cry. I opened the camera app. "My name is Michael Hartman," I said, my voice even. The lens pointed at my face before panning to the door. "It is Tuesday, October 24th, at approximately 4:15 p.m. This is my property, 17 Mayfield Drive, inherited from my grandmother, Helen Hartman, as per her legally certified last will and testament. The locks have been changed without my consent." I walked around the house, documenting every locked door, every new, gleaming piece of brass. Then I saw it. By the side of the house, next to the pile of autumn leaves waiting for pickup, were 3 large, black trash bags. My blood ran cold. I walked over and tore one open. My clothes, my books, all thrown in, covered in coffee grounds from the kitchen trash can they'd clearly emptied on top. I tore open the second bag. My files from work, my personal documents, all mixed in with wet, rotting food scraps. The third bag, this one was the worst. It held the small, personal things I had brought from my apartment. A framed photo of me and Helen on my college graduation day. A small wooden bird she had carved for me when I was 10. All of it was jumbled together, the glass on the frame shattered. And some things were missing. Crucial things. My grandmother's tablet, the one with the locked time capsule, was gone. A silver bracelet she'd given me, which I kept on my dresser, was gone. My passport and birth certificate from my desk drawer were gone. They hadn't just locked me out. They had looted my life and thrown the rest in the garbage. They had stolen my identity. I kept recording, my voice a low, steady monotone, documenting every single ruined item, every missing heirloom. The communications director had taken over completely. I was gathering evidence. I was building a case. I was no longer a grieving grandson. I was an opponent. When I finally stopped recording, I sent the video file to a secure folder on my own cloud with a timestamp. Then I called Leah. Leah, I said, my voice finally cracking, the professional facade crumbling. They did it. They locked me out. I'm on my way, she said, no hesitation. Don't go anywhere. Don't talk to them. I'm coming. As I waited for her, sitting on the curb across the street from the house that was no longer my home, I looked at the dark windows. I thought about the missing tablet. I thought about the locked time capsule and the secrets it held. They thought they had taken everything. They thought they had silenced me. But they had made one critical mistake. They had made it personal. And they had left me with the one thing I needed most, a reason to burn their world to the ground. The next few days were a blur of legal paperwork and sleepless nights on Leah's couch. My initial shock had hardened into a cold, methodical resolve. The first thing I did was hire Amber Doyle. She wasn't cheap, her retainer alone made my eyes water, but her reputation was legendary. Her specialty was fighting dirty, and I knew this was going to be the dirtiest fight of my life. I sat in her sleek, modern office high above the city, a stark contrast to the warm, lived-in feel of my grandmother's house. I laid out everything for her. The will, the printed email I'd found in the attic, the hours of video I had taken of the illegal lockout and my ruined belongings, the list of missing items, including the tablet. Amber listened intently, her face unreadable. She wore a sharp, dark pantsuit and had her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered strategy. Okay, she said when I was finished, her pen tapping a sharp rhythm on a yellow legal pad. The illegal eviction is clear-cut. The video is damning. The email is good circumstantial evidence of their intent. But a good lawyer, and they'll hire a good lawyer, will argue it's just talk. The undue influence claim is their main weapon. We need to prove, conclusively, that Helen was of sound mind and acting on her own free will. She was, I insisted. She was sharper than all of them combined. I believe you, Amber said, her eyes meeting mine. But we need to prove it to a judge. We need more than your word against theirs. We need something they can't refute. A silver bullet. Her digital time capsule, I said, the words tumbling out. She had this online storage thing. She said it had everything that mattered in it. But it's locked with 2 passwords. I only know the first one. And they took her tablet, which was probably auto-logged in. Amber's eyes lit up with a flicker of interest. A digital time capsule. That's good. That's very good. It shows foresight. It shows she was tech-savvy, not some confused old woman. Finding a way into that is now our top priority. What else do you know about it? Nothing, I said, the frustration evident in my voice. I've tried every password I can think of. Birthdays, pet names, anniversaries. Then you need to think harder, she said, her tone firm but not unkind. Think about her life outside of your family, her secrets, her friends. Who did she trust? Her words echoed in my mind for days. Who did she trust? I spent hours at Leah's kitchen table, surrounded by takeout containers and the few things I had managed to salvage from the trash bags. I called the tech support for the cloud service, spending 2 hours on hold only to be told that without the second password or access to her original devices, they couldn't help me due to their privacy policy. It was a dead end. I felt despair creeping in. What if the proof was locked away forever? Leah, seeing my frustration, put a hand on my shoulder. Mike think. Helen was smart. If she made a vault, she must have left a key somewhere. Not a literal key. A clue. A clue. I went back to the small box of things I had rescued. There wasn't much. The broken picture frame, a few books, and the little wooden bird she had carved for me. I picked it up, running my thumb over the smooth wood. And then I remembered something. A conversation from years ago. I was complaining about my dad's controlling nature. Helen had just laughed. "Oh, Dennis has always been like that," she'd said. "All bark and no bite. As long as you know where his power ends and yours begins. That's why I'll always have my Margaret. She's my failsafe." Margaret, her half-sister, the one my family never talked about, felt like a lightning strike. I had only met her a handful of times at big family events when I was a kid. She was quiet, kept to herself. My father and mother never spoke of her. They treated her like a distant, slightly embarrassing relative. I scrambled for my laptop, my heart hammering against my ribs. I searched her name, Margaret Holden. I found her number online. Felt like a long shot, a desperate Hail Mary. I dialed, my hand shaking. An older woman's voice, cautious and wary, answered on the third ring. "Hello, is this Margaret Holden?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Who's asking?" "My name is Michael Hartman." Helen Hartman was my grandmother. The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. For a second, I thought she had hung up. "Michael," she finally said, her voice softening just a fraction. "I was wondering when you might call. Your grandmother told me you would, if things got bad." My breath caught. Relief washed over me so intensely my knees felt weak. She talked to you about this?" "She talked to me about everything, son. Especially about your father. I know my nephew. I've known his greedy streak since he was a boy." She sighed, a weary sound. "Helen knew he wouldn't let that house go without a fight. She made a plan, a backup plan. She told me to wait for your call." "The time capsule," I said. "She locked it. I can't get in." "I know," Margaret said. She gave me the second key. She said I was the only one Dennis would never think to look for. He was always too proud to acknowledge his mother's side of the family. He saw us as country folk. The next morning, I was in my car, driving 2 hours east into the Oregon countryside. Ashwood was a small, blink-and-you'll-miss-it town. Margaret lived in a small, tidy house with a sprawling, beautiful garden. She was older than I remembered, with kind eyes that held a glint of the same mischievous fire I used to see in my grandmother's. She didn't offer empty pleasantries. She handed me a cup of strong tea and sat with me at her kitchen table. She told me a story about when Dennis was 20, how he'd borrowed money from his mother's savings to buy a flashy car and never paid it back. "He's not a bad man, Michael," she said sadly. "He's just a weak one, and money is his weakness." Finally, she went to a locked wooden box on her mantelpiece and retrieved a small, folded piece of paper. "She told me this was from a poem we both loved as children," Margaret said. "Something no one else would ever guess." I unfolded the paper. On it was a single line of text, written in my grandmother's familiar cursive. "The west wind cries." It wasn't just a password. It was a message from my grandmother, a final piece of her wisdom, delivered by the one person she knew she could trust. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this means." "Oh, I think I do," she said, patting my hand. "It means you're about to give your father the surprise of his life. Make it count, Michael. For Helen." On the drive back to Portland, I felt a sense of power I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was armed. I called Amber Doyle from the car. "I've got it," I said the moment she picked up. "I've got the silver bullet." I could almost hear her smile through the phone. "Good. Very good. Get to my office. The hunt is over. Now the war begins." The preliminary hearing was held in a sterile, impersonal courtroom that felt 100 miles away from the warm wood and stained glass of my grandmother's house. I sat beside Amber Doyle at one long table, my back straight, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Across the room at another sat my parents and my brother, Ryan. They were flanked by their lawyer, a man whose reputation preceded him, Paul Ferris, known in legal circles as the Sledgehammer. He was expensive, aggressive, and known for turning civil cases into bloodbaths. My parents weren't just fighting. They were coming for scorched earth. My father, Dennis, wore his best suit, his face set in a mask of solemn paternal concern. My mother, Carol, looked fragile, a picture of aggrieved motherhood, occasionally dabbing a dry eye with a handkerchief. Ryan just stared straight ahead, his face pale and drawn, looking like a boy who had wandered into the middle of a war zone. It was a masterclass in public relations, a performance worthy of an Oscar. Ferris began. He painted a picture of a loving, worried family, deeply concerned about their elderly mother who, in her final days, had been preyed upon by a manipulative grandson. He spoke of my erratic behavior since her death, my unhealthy fixation on the house. He was good. He was very, very good. He twisted my love for my grandmother into a sinister obsession, my grief into a calculated ploy for financial gain. This is a family tragedy, Ferris concluded, his voice resonating with false sympathy. All Mr. and Mrs. Hartman want is to honor Helen's true wishes and ensure the family's assets are handled responsibly, not squandered by a grandson who clearly is not acting rationally. When it was Amber's turn, she stood up slowly. She was the complete opposite of Ferris. Where he was loud and theatrical, she was quiet and precise. Every movement, every word was deliberate. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm and clear, "we agree this is a family tragedy, but the tragedy is not my client's grief. The tragedy is his parents' profound and documented greed." Amber didn't start with emotion. She started with facts. She had created a large binder, a copy for the judge and for the opposing counsel. "My crisis file," she called it. "Let's establish a timeline, shall we?" she said, clicking a button on a remote. A large screen on the wall flickered to life. On September 15th, 3 weeks before Mrs. Helen Hartman's passing, her son, Dennis Hartman, was already negotiating the sale of her property. "Let's look at Exhibit A." She projected the email I had found. The damning words filled the screen. A low murmur went through the courtroom. My father's face tightened, the mask of concern slipping just a little. Ferris objected, calling it irrelevant speculation, but the judge waved him down. "It speaks to motive, Mr. Ferris." Overruled. "Thank you, Your Honor," Amber said smoothly. "Now let's move to Exhibit B, a sworn statement from Mr. Larry Johnson, Mrs. Hartman's next-door neighbor for 30 years. He testifies that he saw men in suits, representatives from Cascade Urban Partners, visiting the property and conferring with Mr. Dennis Hartman in the driveway on at least 2 occasions prior to Helen's death. The net was tightening. Amber then cross-examined my father. It was brutal. "Mr. Hartman," she asked, "did you or did you not change the locks on your son's legal residence on October 24th? "We were securing the property," my father stated, sticking to his script. "We were worried about Michael's state of mind." "Worried?" Amber echoed. "Is that why you then had his personal belongings, including legal documents and family heirlooms, thrown into trash bags with rotting food? Let's review Exhibit C." She played the video I had taken on my phone. The courtroom watched in silence as the camera panned over the new locks, the trashed belongings, the shattered picture frame. My mother flinched, for the first time looking genuinely uncomfortable. "And then there's this," Amber said, her voice dropping. She projected the gaslighting text message onto the screen. "Don't bother calling. You don't live there anymore." Does that sound like a worried father, Mr. Hartman, or an illegal eviction? Ferris was on his feet, objecting furiously, but Amber was relentless. She was dismantling their narrative, brick by brick. They had built a house of cards, and she was pulling out the foundation. My father was starting to look flushed, his calm facade cracking under the pressure. My mother was whispering frantically to him. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartman's entire case," Amber said, her voice steady. rests on the claim that their mother was not of sound mind. They claim she was confused, unable to make her own decisions. She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. They claim she needed their protection, their guidance. Then she turned to the judge. Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to present one final piece of evidence. Evidence that my client was only recently able to access, thanks to a key provided by his great-aunt. From a secure digital storage service his grandmother aptly named her time capsule. A technician hooked up a speaker system. Amber looked directly at my parents. Their faces had gone from red with anger to pale with dawning horror. They knew what was coming. This recording was made by Helen Hartman 1 week before she passed away. Amber announced to the silent courtroom. First, my grandmother's voice filled the room. It was weak, yes, but it was clear, lucid, and full of her usual fire. I'm recording this on October 2nd, she said. My name is Helen Hartman, and I am of perfectly sound mind and body, no matter what my son and his wife may try to tell people after I'm gone. I have reviewed my will with my lawyer, and it reflects my final wishes. The house on Mayfield is for Michael. It is only for Michael. He's the only one who ever understood its heart. This is my decision. Mine alone. The courtroom was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Then, a new voice entered the recording. My father's. It was a wheedling, insistent tone I knew all too well. Mom, be reasonable. His recorded voice pleaded. $1 million, maybe more. Think of what we could do with that. Think of what it could do for Ryan's future. He's got so much debt. Then, my mother's voice, sharp and saccharine. Helen, the upkeep is too much for Michael. He doesn't need this burden. Selling is the responsible thing to do. It's what's best for the family. Back to my grandmother, her voice tired but resolute. Get out, both of you. You will not bully me in my own home. You will not speak for me. The decision is made. The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Amber let it stretch out, a thick, heavy blanket of shame settling over my parents' table. My father was staring at the floor, his face ashen, a bead of sweat tracing a line down his temple. My mother looked like she had seen a ghost, the ghost of the woman she had betrayed, her own words condemning her. Ryan was openly weeping, his face buried in his hands. Ferris, the sledgehammer, looked utterly defeated. He sank back into his chair, his shoulders slumped. His client had been caught, red-handed, in a lie of their own making. Amber Doyle let the silence do its work for a full 10 seconds before she spoke again, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Your Honor, she said, her voice ringing with quiet triumph. In light of this evidence, which proves a clear and premeditated campaign of coercion and harassment against an elderly woman, followed by an illegal eviction and slander against her chosen heir, we are filing an immediate motion. We ask the court to issue an injunction to freeze any and all potential sales or transactions related to the property at 17 Mayfield Drive, pending the final dismissal of this frivolous and malicious lawsuit. The judge looked down at my parents, his eyes cold with contempt. He looked at the evidence, at their crumbling faces, at their weeping son. He picked up his gavel. Motion granted. The sound of the gavel echoed in the silent courtroom. It was the sound of a closing door, the sound of a finished war, the sound of justice. The $1.4 million deal was dead, and my grandmother's house was finally, truly safe. Winning in court felt like a surge of adrenaline, a moment of pure, righteous victory. But the aftermath felt like walking through the cold, gray ruins of a battlefield. The judge's order was swift and absolute. I was granted immediate and sole access to the property. A sheriff's deputy was assigned to escort me to the house to ensure a peaceful transfer. The term peaceful transfer turned out to be a bitter irony. My parents had been given a 24-hour window by the court to retrieve what they claimed were their remaining personal belongings. It was a standard procedure. I expected them to take a few things they might have left behind over the years, an old lamp, maybe some books. What I didn't expect was the sheer, calculated malice of what they did in those 24 hours. When the locksmith finished changing the locks for a second time, this time with keys that only I possessed, and the deputy gave me the all-clear. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Sour milk. They had emptied a full carton of milk down the kitchen sink drain, where it was left to curdle and fester in the pipes. It was a petty, juvenile act, but it was only the beginning, a declaration of their spite. I walked through the rooms, my heart sinking with every step. This wasn't just neglect. This was a surgical strike. In the living room, a long, deep scratch ran the length of my grandmother's prized mahogany dining table, clearly made by dragging a key or a screwdriver across its polished surface. The heavy, velvet curtains in the den had been pulled down, one of them torn from its rings. The kitchen was worse. They had left the freezer door wide open, a puddle of murky, defrosted water spreading across the hardwood floor, causing it to warp. They'd taken the time to unhinge several cabinet doors, leaving them hanging askew like broken teeth. It was a deliberate, methodical campaign of destruction, designed to cause as much damage and inconvenience as possible without looking like overt vandalism. Each act was a silent scream of their rage and humiliation. The most painful discovery was in my old bedroom, the room I'd stayed in as a child. They had taken a pair of scissors to the handful of suits I kept there for work, leaving them in shredded ribbons in the closet. My work, the part of my life I had built for myself, away from them. It was so personal, so hateful. They hadn't just lost a lawsuit. They had lost their minds, their decency, every last shred of whatever parental love they might have once had for me. The sheriff's deputy, a burly man with a kind, tired face, just shook his head slowly as he walked through with me. "I've seen a lot of bad blood after a custody battle or a messy divorce," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But this is something else. This is personal. You make sure you document everything. Take pictures. Lots of them." I did. Just as I had before, I pulled out my phone and became the communications director again, my professional self a shield against the pain. I recorded every scratch, every stain, every broken piece of my life. This time, however, the cold detachment was gone. I just felt a profound, hollow sadness. This was my family, and this is what they were capable of. Leah came over that evening with 2 large pizzas and a 6-pack of craft beer, knowing I wouldn't have the heart to cook or even think about food. She walked through the house with me, her expression hardening from sympathy to righteous anger with every new discovery. "This is sick, Mike," she said, standing in the ruined kitchen, her hands on her hips. "This is a level of vindictive I can't even comprehend. To do this to Helen's home. This is who they are," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "This is what happens when you take away their money. The masks come off." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, thinking. My first instinct was to call and scream, to demand they see what they had done. But what was the point? They knew what they'd done. They'd done it on purpose. The next day I didn't call them. Instead, I called a professional appraiser and a restoration contractor to get official, notarized estimates for the damages. The number was staggering. Then I forwarded the detailed reports, the new photos, and the bills to Amber Doyle. "They're not getting away with this," I told her, my voice hard as steel. "Not this time." 2 days later, a process server walked up the perfectly manicured lawn of my parents' immaculate suburban home and handed my father a new envelope. It wasn't a letter from a disappointed son. It was a new civil lawsuit, separate from the inheritance case, for the exact amount of the damages, plus punitive fees for malicious destruction of property. My phone rang less than an hour later. It was my mother. Her voice was shrill, hysterical. "Michael, how could you? After everything we've been through. Another lawsuit? Are you trying to bankrupt us? This is your family." I let her scream. I let her cry her crocodile tears. I let her paint herself as the victim one last time. When she finally paused to take a breath, I spoke, my voice as calm and cold as the courtroom had been. "You seem to have me mistaken for someone who still cares what you think, Carol," I said. It was the first time I had ever called her by her first name, and the sound of it hung in the air like a slap. "You had your chance to be a mother. You had your chance to be a decent human being. You failed on both counts. From now on, you will not call this number again. Any and all communication will go through our lawyers. Is that understood?" There was a stunned, sputtering silence on the other end. I think in that moment, she finally realized that the son she thought she could control, the boy she could manipulate, was gone forever. In his place was a man she didn't know, a man who now played by a new set of rules, her rules, the ones based on money and consequences. "Goodbye, Carol," I said, and I hung up the phone. I stood there in the quiet, damaged house. The war was over, but the cleanup had just begun. I had won the legal battle, but I had lost a family. And as I looked around at the wreckage, I realized that maybe I hadn't lost them at all. Maybe I had just finally seen them for who they had been all along. And in a strange, painful way, that was its own kind of victory. It was the truth. And the truth, however ugly, sets you free. The next 6 months were a blur of construction dust, the smell of fresh paint, and the slow, steady process of healing, both for the house and for me. The lawsuit for damages was settled out of court. My parents, facing a mountain of undeniable evidence and the threat of another humiliating public hearing, had no choice but to write a very large check. It wasn't about the money for me, it was about the principle. It was the cost of their hatred quantified on a balance sheet. With the help of Leah and a few good friends who had stuck by me through the whole ordeal, I didn't just repair the house. I resurrected it. We sanded down the scratched mahogany table until it shone again. We patched the walls, replaced the ruined plumbing, and hung new curtains. But as we worked, stripping away the old and bringing in the new, an idea began to form in my mind. My job was in communications, in helping people and small organizations tell their stories and fight for their causes. I saw firsthand how people with righteous causes often lacked the voice or the platform to be heard. My grandmother had left me this house to be its keeper. What if being its keeper meant more than just living in it and protecting its past? What if it meant turning it into a resource for the future? I decided to transform the entire ground floor, the living room, the dining room, the den, into a co-working and workshop space. I called it the Hartman Hub, a space for community voices. My goal was to offer it for free to local nonprofits, activists, and community organizers, a place where they could meet, plan, and learn. I would run free workshops on weekends, teaching them the basics of public relations, social media, and how to get their message out, all the skills I used in my professional life. It was a way to honor my grandmother's spirit of generosity and my own passion for communication. It was turning a place of intense personal pain into a source of public good. The house's soul wasn't just in its history anymore. It was in its future. The grand opening was on a bright Saturday in late April. The house was filled with people, with laughter, with the buzz of new ideas. Local leaders, heads of small charities, young activists, they all came. Leah stood beside me, a proud smile on her face, handing out brochures we had designed. "Look what you did, Mike," she said, her voice soft amidst the happy noise. "You turned the worst thing that ever happened to you into something beautiful." As I was talking to the head of a local animal shelter, showing her how to set up a press release, I saw a familiar figure hesitating in the doorway. It was my brother, Ryan. He looked different, thinner. The arrogant confidence he used to wear like a cheap suit was gone. He just looked tired and sad, like he was carrying a heavy weight. He was holding a small, flat, wrapped gift. I excused myself and walked over to him. We stood in an awkward silence for a moment, the cheerful noise of the party swirling around us like a different world. "What are you doing here, Ryan?" I asked. My voice wasn't angry. It was just weary. I wanted to see what you'd done with the place," he said, gesturing vaguely at the crowded room. "It's amazing." He held out the gift. "This is for you. For the house." I unwrapped it. It was a framed photo, not of me or of our family. It was a beautiful, candid shot of Grandma Helen, taken years ago, sitting on the porch swing, laughing, her head thrown back in pure joy. It was a picture I'd never seen before. "I found it in an old album at their house," he said. "I thought she should be here." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. "Mike, he started, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. What I did, what I asked of you, it was wrong. I was selfish and I was a coward. I let Dad convince me that money was more important than, well, than you, than family. He took a shaky breath. Was it worth it? No, it's cost me everything. My relationship with you, my own self-respect. I look in the mirror and I hate the person I see. I looked at him, at my little brother, and for the first time I didn't see an enemy. I saw a weak person who had made a terrible choice and was now living with the consequences. He reached into his jacket and pulled out two more things, a folded document and a personal check. This is a sworn affidavit, he said, his hands shaking as he handed it to me. I had it notarized last week. It details every conversation I was a part of where Dad and Mom talked about pressuring Grandma, about their plans for the sale, about hiding assets. I was too scared to stand up in court. It's the biggest regret of my life. But I can at least give you this. The truth, on paper. He then handed me the check. It was for $5,000. It's not much, he said, looking at the floor. But it's everything I have in savings. For the repairs. I know they paid for it, but this is from me. I need to do this. This was more than an apology. This was an act of penance. A tangible, costly effort to make amends. It was the first truly honorable thing I had seen him do in years. I took the affidavit and the check. Why now, Ryan? I asked quietly. Because I saw what they did to the house. When I went over there, I saw the hate they'd left behind. And I realized it wasn't about securing my future. It was about punishing you. And I was a part of that. I can't live with that anymore. I nodded slowly. Thank you, Ryan, I said. This means something. I looked him in the eye. It doesn't fix everything. You know that, right? He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. I know, but it's a start, I finished. But we're going to need a lot of time. I didn't invite him to stay. It was too soon for that. But as he turned and walked away, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't anger. It wasn't forgiveness either, not yet. It was a tiny, fragile seed of hope. I went back to the party, to my new life. My relationship with my parents remained non-existent, reduced to the cold formality of lawyers and the occasional, sterile birthday card with no personal message. But my world had also grown. I spoke to my great-aunt Margaret every Sunday. She would tell me stories about my grandmother's adventurous youth, painting a picture of a woman even more vibrant and rebellious than I had known. My life was smaller in some ways, but so much bigger and richer in others. I was building a new family, a chosen family, built not on blood, but on trust. The very thing my grandmother valued most. A year has passed since the day I was locked out of my own home. The Hartman Hub is thriving. The house that was once a battleground is now filled with purpose, with the sounds of planning, debate, and progress. It's a place where people who are fighting their own battles can come to find their voice, and I've discovered a passion for teaching I never knew I had. Tonight, the house is quiet. The last workshop just ended. I'm standing alone in the main room, which used to be the formal living room. The lights are dim, and the smell of coffee lingers in the air. On the main wall, where a stuffy old landscape painting used to hang, is the framed photo of my grandmother that Ryan gave me. It's the centerpiece of the whole space, the first thing people see when they walk in. Beneath it, I've placed a small brass plaque. It doesn't have her name or dates. It just has a simple inscription, a quote I wrote myself after months of reflection. It reads, "Some homes are not built from bricks, but from trust." I often find myself standing here after everyone has gone home, just looking at her face. Her joyful, defiant laugh seems to echo in the quiet halls. The house is no longer just a memory of her. It's a continuation of her spirit. It's a living, breathing legacy. Tonight, I'm thinking about the workshop I just led. It was for a group of residents from a low-income neighborhood fighting against a big-shot developer who was trying to push them out. A story that sounded all too familiar. I taught them how to organize, how to talk to the press, how to build a narrative that a city council couldn't ignore. I gave them the tools that I had used to save myself. A young woman named Maria came up to me afterwards. "Thank you," she said. her eyes shining with a new determination. Before tonight, we felt helpless. Now we feel like we have a chance. As I watched them leave, energized and full of hope, I felt a sense of peace that no court victory or financial settlement could ever provide. The rage I carried for so long has faded. The hurt is still there, a faint scar on my soul, but it no longer defines me. It's been transformed into something else. Fuel. Purpose. I look up at my grandmother's picture. "You were right, Grandma," I whisper into the quiet of the house. It was never about the value. It was always about the heart. I think about the path that led me here. The betrayal, the fight, the ugly truth. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I wouldn't trade the man I've become because of it. I learned that family isn't always about blood. It's about who shows up when you're at your lowest. It's about who tells you the truth, who has your back, and who reminds you of who you are when you've forgotten. I learned that the deepest wounds can sometimes lead to the greatest strengths, and that the best way to honor a legacy is not just to preserve it, but to build upon it, to make it something that serves others, to turn your own story into a light for someone else's path. I switch off the lights, leaving only a small lamp on beside her photograph. As I walk out and lock my door with my key, I don't feel alone. I feel like I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Thank you all for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight for what was rightfully yours, especially against people you were supposed to trust? Share your story in the comments below. I read them all. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.